Giving a child his freedom.
Felt good.
You have been at this for 12 years.
My country, 'tis of thee.
Why are you doing it?
Sweet land of liberty.
Because God's children are not for sale. It is the fastest growing international crime network that the world has ever seen.
What's up, everyone? So my wife and I just saw Sound of Freedom, and wow, that was a really, really good movie. It was powerful, it was heartbreaking, but it's probably one of the most needed movies of the year.
It is the fastest growing international crime network that the world has ever seen.
We're Homeland Security. You know we can't go off rescuing Honduran kids in Colombia.
This job tears you to pieces.
And where my fathers died.
So the movie follows the story of Tim Ballard, who was a Homeland Security agent, and he was arresting pedophiles, and then he got on a case where he traveled to Colombia to set this girl free. And the movie does a good job at tackling a global issue from a scale that makes it personal, because instead of trying to tackle it on a wider scale, it's saying, okay, this is a true story about a girl that was being rescued out of sex trafficking.
Land of the Pilgrims'
And yet somehow you have failed to bring me one real-world lead.
Much of the movie away, but one thing I'll say is, number one, they do a really good job at kind of showing the horrors of child trafficking and just how terrible and just ugly that world is without it leaving you with images you're like, I wish I never saw that. Another thing that I really liked about that movie was, I left the theater feeling more empowered than hopeless, and more empowered than in horror at what's going on. The movie does a good job instilling hope. And
It's over, Tim. Close up and come back home.
So you quit your job and you go and rescue those kids.
Let freedom ring. Let freedom ring.
South of that river is all rebel territory. No one goes in.
What if this was your daughter?
Sorry, she's gone.
Let freedom ring.
Hear that? That's the sound of freedom.
so this film hit me a lot closer to home than I expected. Growing up, my stepdad ended up being a pedophile, and he was abusing my sister. He was, verbally abusive to me and sometimes physically, but my sister got the worst of it. And, I remember being a little kid getting on his computer and opening up a file and seeing all these pictures of little children porn. And, I ended up running away at a young age, and a lot of my friends also ended up getting trafficked, or they were, they ended up getting hooked on drugs, and somebody would, get them hooked on drugs and then give them drugs for sex. And I'm talking 14, 15-year-old girls. And this was a world I kind of grew up seeing, and, you're numb and desensitized then, but it's like now it's like that's so disgusting and so wicked. And this is a real issue. This film does a really good job tackling a big and raising awareness for an issue that really does take place. This is a big issue. I live in a city where sex trafficking is a major thing going on in the city of Portland.
Portland police say human trafficking crimes in the city have become more visible in recent months.
Fox 12's Bridget Chavez explains what that means after speaking with a sergeant from PPB's Human Trafficking Unit.
It's typically a crime we think happens in the shadows or in secret.
We definitely feel like it's becoming more visible, human trafficking type activities.
While this area may be known for human trafficking, Portland Police Sergeant Christy Butcher says it's happening all over the city.
We get reports, Jansen Beach hotels, the hotels, motels along Northeast MLK Boulevard, Interstate. So there's really no areas that are left unimpacted.
Butcher says in the past few months, traffickers have been recruiting their victims more boldly, often in broad daylight and crowded areas.
Harm.
She says traffickers will often promise to take their victims on expensive trips or even offer those in vulnerable situations a place to stay. She says both are major red flags.
And they're very good at talking and selling these things, and then once they kind of get you hooked, so to speak, that's when they break it, like, hey, we don't have enough money to go on that trip we talked about. I need you to go out and work, which means sell your body.
Their goal is to isolate victims so they feel like they have no one to go to for help.
Trust.
The movie itself, I remember when my wife and I went to Mexico, we went to this little village, and something that was happening in this village was the cartel would come in and find a poor family that couldn't afford, to live. So they would say, oh yes, here, take a loan. And they would start giving these big loans to these poor families. And then when the cartel would come up and they couldn't pay the bill, they would take their little girls or their 10 to 12-year-old daughters and force them into sex slavery to pay off the family's debt. And that was a issue that was happening in Mexico.
A whistleblower is expected to issue a stark warning to lawmakers today that the U.S. has become, quote, the middleman in a multi-billion-dollar migrant child trafficking operation at the border. Joining me now is Republican Texas Congressman Pat Fallon for more on this. Congressman, the headline of this story is horrifying, that the United States government would somehow play the middleman in this. Is that true?
David, thank you for having me on. Absolutely. Joe Biden and his administration have really not only enabled but facilitated the largest sex trafficking and human smuggling operation in human history. And it's been going on now, David, for almost 2.5 years. We've had 7 million people cross the border illegally in the last 2.5 years. We've lost contact. The HHS has lost contact with 85,000 unaccompanied minors. And what most Americans don't realize is the drug cartels charge up to $4,000 per person for people that cross the border. And if you don't have that money, they'll either make you be a mule, they'll harm you, or you can, quote unquote, work it off. And that's why sexual trafficking is alive and well in the United States.
Well, there certainly is no question that the number of unaccompanied children crossing the border has dramatically increased. It was 33,000 in 2020, which is a huge number. Then in 2022, 2 years later, it went up to 152,000. And look at this, just so far this year, and we've only gone through a third of the year, 70,000. That could lead to 210,000 or even higher for the full year. So the numbers have dramatically increased. But again, I just want to be clear. It's not necessarily the government is helping, specifically, consciously helping traffickers of children in this awful, awful crime. It's just that could be the consequence of their actions, right?
David, there's no doubt it's a consequence of their actions. You just said and stated those figures. It's about 700% worse right now than it was under Donald Trump in his last year in office. And that's what happens when you have these soft immigration policies that are allowing people to come in droves.
This is a worldwide issue. One thing that blows my mind is, some of the reviews for this movie kind of shock me. I'm just going to read a couple. So this is from The Guardian. It says, "The Sound of Freedom, the QAnon adjacent thriller seducing America." Now first, the movie follows a true storyline of a little girl being trafficked. It doesn't try to take on the global scheme and try to unravel conspiracy theories of this person's involved and this person. No, it doesn't even do that. It shows a very real problem and a very real situation. Rolling Stone says The Sound of Freedom is a superhero movie for dads with brainworms. And then, CNN also bashed it. And it's kind of raises the question, why? Like, if they see the movie, the movie is not conspiracy. It is a very real issue, and it's something that needs to be raised awareness. But now you have these companies that, I'm just saying, if you're fighting against this movie, there's a very dark reason why. You know, another shocking fact, where I fact-checked this because it's shocking, but Disney owned the rights to this movie for 5 years and blocked it from being released. Netflix wouldn't show it, Amazon wouldn't show it, like all these companies would not even touch this movie. My question is why? It was a very well done movie. It raises awareness of a very real issue, which you can see by the budget it's bringing in that it's doing a good job. And right now, I believe this is one of the most needed movies, because, you know, the truth is, you have groomers that are coming for our children. You have sex books being in the school libraries.
Children's book teaching graphic sex acts, complete with illustrations, making the rounds in school libraries and classrooms across the country, leaving parents and communities outraged. One concerned pastor tried to read the book at a school board meeting, but officials asked him to stop. Here's what he had to say about that.
If you don't want to hear it in a school board meeting, why should children be able to check it out of the school system? You see, we have perverts that are perverting our kids. And you all sit back smug in your chairs and celebrate diversity, equity, and inclusion, but you don't want me to read it so you can hear it.
Knox Zajac. I'm 11 years old and I go to Wyndham Middle School. I'm a 6th grader. I was in the library and this book was on a stand. I'd like to read you a page. My back over my hips as I ask if we should take our clothes off. And he's saying yes before I finish my sentence. He's pulling off my t-shirt.
You have, you know, like in the school system and all across the board, you have this increased sexual awareness being pushed against kids, or increased sexuality being pushed on children that shouldn't be thinking about this stuff. And you know, you have people making videos like, we're coming for your children.
Coming for your children.
And another thing that I've been seeing a lot of is, you know, I've been seeing TED Talks and professors and news stations, instead of using the word pedophile, they'll use the word minor attracted persons.
Because I think it's important to use terminology for groups that members of that group want others to use for them. And MAP advocacy groups like Before You Act have advocated for use of the term MAP. They've advocated for it primarily because it's less stigmatizing than other terms like pedophile.
You may have noticed that I'm using the term minor attracted persons, sometimes abbreviated to MAPS, instead of the more commonly used term pedophile. And I'm doing this because the term pedophile has moved from being a diagnostic label to being a judgmental, hurtful insult that we hurl at people.
And what they're trying to do is they're trying to dole it down so pedophilia is not a big issue, and they're trying to make it like that's, you know, that's just your orientation.
It's an unchangeable sexual orientation, just like, for example, heterosexuality.
No, it's demonic, it's from the pit of hell, and you know, this is what Jesus has to say about it. You know, Matthew chapter 18, verse 6, it says, "But whoever causes one of these little ones who believes in me to sin, it would be better for him if a milestone were hung around his neck, and he were drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe to the world because of offenses, for offenses must come, but woe to the man to whom the offenses come." See, it's saying it would be better if you had a millstone hung around your neck and you tossed in the sea than harm one of these little ones. You know, pedophilia is a major issue. It's sick, it's demonic, it's twisted. And I love the fact that this movie's coming out and it's raising so much attention and it's spreading like wildfire. Why? Because guess what? There's an agenda being pushed on our children. There's an agenda to groom children, and this slaps it right in the face. You know, California, the Democrats are trying to block a bill from being passed that would make pedophilia a felony charge. What's amazing though is this movie actually caused them to pass the bill because so much outrage was raised up. You know, I believe that this is the generation God is going to use to change things, and things are getting exposed like never before. Things are being brought into light. You know, the things like, if you look at Jeffrey Epstein's island, that was a real thing. There was an island for pedophilia that politicians and people would go to.
Well, we definitely received substantial evidence that he was involved in trafficking young women and children to the Virgin Islands.
And then when you try, all of a sudden, Jeffrey Epstein was in prison and he magically hangs himself before any of the names get released. I'm sorry, that's not conspiracy, that's news. This is the perfect time for this movie to come out. But anyway, I just want to encourage you, if you haven't seen it yet, go see it. Take the time, go see it, grab some friends, it's worth watching, and God bless you guys.